Tonight, we have Dr. Halden Clark from our Great Plains Vet Education Center talking this evening about some current experiences with high-risk stocker calves and kind of a 2-year pilot study that he's been working on. So I look forward to learning more about that and the ins and outs of that pilot study. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Halden.
All right, thanks, Casey. I'm glad to be here tonight. Thanks for spending some time with us this evening. I'll be talking tonight about a project that has been in my mind for a while. And as an extension person, it felt a little bit disingenuous to recommend that others try it if I had never tried it myself. So I convinced 2 good friends to jump in with me, and we launched it here in the last couple of years. There have been kind of 2 years of it. This is what I'm going to tell you about is the second year, which was the more significant project, which is essentially taking a group of high-risk southeastern sale barn calves and backgrounding them on corn stalks right here in south central Nebraska. So this was on the side for me. It's not a part of research through the university. It's a side project that we did in our spare time. So in a sense, this is like a producer perspective episode of the Beef Watch podcast, which I imagine most of you are familiar with. So I'm kind of speaking from both sides, both a little bit in my extension role, but more so as a producer who basically tried something, and I'll tell you all about it. Hopefully it'll be of value to you, and you can get some things from it that you can maybe use. So yeah, so the question I'm trying to answer with this project is, can backgrounding high-risk calves on corn stalks be carried out successfully despite the challenges of winter in south central Nebraska and with positive animal health outcomes? So I'm originally from Greeley, Colorado, and I've been in Nebraska for about 6 years now. Several of those years I was in cow-calf and feedlot practice, and I was told during that time that in this area, a lot of farmers used to buy steers in the fall and then background them on corn stalks through the winter. But over time, that's kind of died down. And I'm wondering why. I know a part of it is that most of the fences are gone, and that over time, attention has basically moved toward row crop in this area and away from cattle for the most part. Not entirely, but largely. Pasture acreages have gone steadily down and crop acreages have come up. So those are all probably involved, but a big question for me, is it because profit margins have gotten thinner for those groups of cattle? So if you watched last week's webinar, then you saw that simply buying calves at market average prices in the fall and then selling them in February is unlikely to be reliably profitable over time. It'd be kind of a hit or miss situation at best. So what about seeking to upgrade groups of calves? So during my years in practice, I was face to face with some of the tens of thousands of high-risk calves that move directly into Nebraska feed yards every year. The BRD death losses are well documented in the research literature in these types of animals. So would backgrounding some of them on corn stalks reduce the BRD burden that they face going straight into dry lot feedlot pens? And would that type of a project allow for enough profit margin to make it worthwhile? So tonight, I won't be presenting any new scientific information. The only thing new tonight is just an attempt to modify the outcome of a system by modifying the system itself. And the outcome we're hoping to get is increased profitability through lower BRD death loss and an opportunity to upgrade cattle and find some efficiency by using crop residues for farmers and cattle producers here in south central Nebraska. So it's an effort to help connect some dots for somebody considering launching a winter corn stalk or cover crop grazing endeavor. I think you might find a few things you can use for either situation. All right, so there are plenty of corn stalks in this area. A lot of them go ungrazed. Some of that's because farmers don't necessarily want those acres grazed, but a portion of it is because no one has asked or there's just been no communication on it. The landowner would be perfectly willing, but there's just been no request. So I think that extensive grazing systems as compared to intensive, meaning confinement systems, I think that grazing systems may significantly improve health outcomes in high-risk calves versus pens. I think there's reason to believe that. And I think that if this were to catch on, then having winter calf backgrounding projects may complement row crop operations from a labor standpoint. So there's no consistently less expensive forage source for cattle in Nebraska than corn stalks. Then some of the other things that come into play with designing and thinking through this project have been that BRD losses are no better and in some cases are worse than in previous decades in the feedlot industry. And we couple that with the public wanting reduced antibiotic use in food producing animals. So it seems to me that the time is right to work toward evaluating options to limit BRD without leaning on increased antibiotic use. So my goal is to explain our project for anyone thinking about launching something like this. One of the things we realized from the very beginning was that for this to work for us, the project had to be very low overhead, and it also had to be flexible enough to adapt the numbers of animals and the locations grazed from year to year. So it needs to be portable and as little metal as possible involved. So this picture is one calf that felt the need to do things a little bit different, and that's kind of what we were planning with this project along the way. Basically, he decided to climb all the way up in the bunk instead of just eating out of the bunk like a normal calf. So you may be thinking along those lines, why not just graze those corn stalks with dry cows like a normal person would do? And there are a number of operations in our area that are doing very well with that. The ones that I am familiar with, the people that send the cattle down in those cases from the sandhills, those are long-term relationships, people that grew up together and stay in close contact. So obviously there's a huge amount of trust that's needed for somebody to send their cow herd down to someone else to background them out of the local area on corn stalks. So if you don't have a long-term relationship with somebody with a large cow herd that wants to send cows to you, it can be difficult to find the animals to put on corn stalks. So that's part of the reason for the calf project, is it's a readily available source if you're the owner of the cattle yourself. So that's one of the reasons why I'm not talking about grazing cows on corn stalks. So some of the downsides of this type of project are the short time period. So buying in November and selling in January or February, you're obviously putting yourself in a situation where you're exposed to a lot of market volatility and financial risk. There's always the winter weather to contend with. There's the question of whether whether the fence will stay up and hot and whether the calves will stay in. And then there's the labor question. This is going to be a little bit more labor intensive than a feedlot, adding another pen. So some of the possible solutions, if we decide we can keep our costs to a minimum by putting in some sweat equity and buy some bulls, cutting bulls, that might be a way to limit our exposure to market risk by not spending as many dollars on the front end. We'll be managing our health risk via the extensive setting, and we'll be using low-cost corn stalks. And then when we started the project in November, corn and distillers grains were also very reasonable. They've come up quite a bit since then. But okay, so is it reasonable to think that BRD burden is going to be reduced in forage grazing systems? So we have a lot of research evidence that describes the BRD burden in feedlots. And when you look for the studies that would explain the overall average BRD burden in stocker systems, especially grazing-based stocker systems, you're not going to find very many studies. So there are a few, and some of those are right here on the next page, and they are interesting. They strongly suggest that the BRD burden is going to be significantly lower in dry lot systems. Can't say exactly why that would be, but I would suspect that it's fewer effective contacts, fewer chances for animals to spread bacteria and viruses to each other when they're spread out. There could be other things related to behavior, like the mental state of the animals, being occupied for many hours a day. There's a lot we don't know exactly as far as why that would be, but those are some brainstorming possibilities. So there is some research evidence to suggest that the burden would be lower. All right, so even if that's true, is it just too cold and snowy in that part of Nebraska to graze corn stalks? Well, it was minus 26 this morning, so it may not be the best day to say, no, it's not, it's fine. But I spent a little bit of time working with Al Dutcher. He provided me with some numbers here on this slide. So these are grazing days at weather stations in our local area here. So you can see weather stations in Bradshaw, Friend, Clay Center, Shickley, Geneva, York, and Grand Island across the top. So each one of those is a weather station where they're going to keep track of weather events. And specifically on this, they're tabulating the number of days with 6 inches of snow cover on the ground or less, which we were considering grazing days. Now that doesn't take into account ice. So if there was ice on the corn stalks, they may not be available for grazing at all, but it would still be in this count. And the other thing it doesn't take into account is a real crusty snow that would have basically the same effect. But this is pretty close, I think, to the real grazing days for these different weather stations over the last 20 years. So you can see here from 2000 to 2020. So the averages are pretty good in this area. There's 110, 115, 113 grazing days per season, the season being November, December, January, and February. So there are certainly some years in there, like 2010, you can see would have been a tough year to be trying to graze corn stalks. That's calendar year 2010, so it could be like school year 2009, 2010. That could muddy this a little bit, like if there was a January storm one year and then a December storm the next winter, they'd all come under calendar year 2010. So that could, if you remember a certain very memorable storm, it's just in the calendar year that took place in. All right. So anyway, I think it's reasonable to conclude that there are a number of very good grazing days down here, and that on average, things will be reasonably good. Okay, so we decided to go ahead with a project, as you can tell here. So the calves got here after 8 hours on the truck from Missouri. We checked our shrink, and it was at 4%, which we were pretty pleased with. The truck appeared to have been very nice and clean when it departed based on the amount of manure buildup that was in there. They left after a Thursday sale and got there fairly early on Friday morning, drove through the night. And that's one thing that I really like to have is ideally less than 24 hours from the farm of origin to the new home for cattle. This is going to keep stress from becoming chronic. As the hours tick by, stress becomes more toward the chronic end, and that can be a lot harder on health than just a 24-hour or shorter interruption to their normal routine. So that's part of the shrink. I had to blur a couple numbers. I'm not quite sure what the exact legalities are for what they weigh, but we kept close. We paid close attention to the shrink there just to know what we were getting into and how concerned to be on the front end. So these are the calves right when they first arrived. I think I've got a quick video here. They averaged 557 pounds when we bought them. Sorry, the computer's giving me a little, there we go. We got in contact with an order buyer through a friend of a friend, and we ended up with 18 steers and 70 bulls, 88 head total. For the first few days, they balled really well, which I was pleased with. That suggests to me that they were very fresh, freshly weaned. They had not been from sale barn to sale barn. They had just come in fresh, been sold, and came right to Nebraska. So felt good about that. There were very few ear tags. I think most of these had never been touched before, but they were overall very accepting of people and equipment. They weren't particularly wild. They were okay around the four-wheeler, okay around the tractor. So that was really nice. Oh, sorry. So we knew we wanted to get them drinking as soon as possible after arrival. So we had 3 tanks ready for them. And they walked off the truck and started drinking right away and started eating right away as well. So that was nice. Felt like we were off to a good start. Okay, so if you're thinking about a project like this, site selection is really important. We picked a place where there was available water on site, which that adds a lot. Having to haul water can really up the workload in a hurry. Based on those grazing days, we felt like it would be really important to have at least 2 weeks of hay and cornstalk bales on hand. So that's what we did. We knew we'd want to have a windbreak or a building or a shelter belt, something the cattle can get behind in the case of a bad winter storm, so that we didn't have significant losses just due to weather. And then we knew we'd need something to get an animal cotton treated if sick, and it had to be portable. So this isn't what we started the project with, but this is what we ended with. It's a bud box. It's just 10 panels. 9 of them are 12 feet long and 1 of them is 10 feet long, and you can just build a little bud box in a pretty short amount of time. You can just drag your lighter portable panels right up to this area here on the bud box, and they work really well. It was excellent. We had really good success getting our cattle through and worked, and so that's something to keep in mind as far as being portable, picking the right spot, and finding a way to get cattle caught, treated, and worked when you need to. All right. Okay, as far as how much corn stalks do you need? Well, Mary can give you some very exact numbers, and I think she probably will here at the end. For our purposes, and in most cases, 160 acres of corn stalks is plenty for semi-loaded calves for the whole season, the whole grazing season. And that even gives you some buffer for weathering and quality loss over time. So one of the things that we like to keep an eye on is husk, just looking around on the ground for husk. That's after the grain's gone, which is what they would get first, then husk is the next best thing. And once the husk is all gone, the best of the forage quality is gone. And with the calves we had this winter, they never came close to cleaning up all the husk. There was plenty of husk the whole season. Even through some really high winds, there was still plenty. So at this level of stocking density, it's really hard to tell visually what's been grazed and what hasn't. You just have to look for manure piles. But if you fence across rows in some particular spot and you look at what's been grazed and what hasn't been grazed, it's pretty hard to tell. The ground cover looks the same. So we didn't want to buy anything more than we had to. This is one thing that we knew we needed, a caker, basically a little mini feed wagon. So that's one of the things we bought. The bunks were made of an old grain leg that was $44 on big iron. Then some time and a welder and some wire for the welder and some skill, but not my skill. That was Jeremiah, one of the guys that I worked with. He did a really nice job on the bunks. So that's the feed wagon in action and the bunks that we have there. So using what you have, I think, is really important for starting a small project like this. So it just works off of a pull string trapdoor and dropped our feed right down in the bunk, just right. So our ration was 4 pounds per head per day of dry distiller's grains and another 4 pounds per head per day of cracked corn. We used a co-product balancer mineral, made sure that we had plenty of calcium to balance the phosphorus that's in a pretty good dose of grain. We had rumensin in blocks. We started those. We ended up using about 2 short semis worth of feed. And we started the rumensin blocks with the second semi-load. We didn't start off with rumensin in the ration. We ended up doing 1 pulse of CTC from day 26 to 30 under a VFD. And that's what our setup looked like. This was our acre filling station right here. And this gave a good chance for the kids to be involved. They could scoop the feed down to the auger, which was excellent. And out it went into the bunks. So that was our system, and it really worked nice, I thought. So on arrival, there were a list of things we did. We put in an ear tag. We implanted with a component TEG, kind of a middle of the road implant that would be about right for the gains that we were going to be looking for. We did a meloxicam bolus, which is a painkiller. It's probably a painkiller that a lot of people on the call have taken themselves at one time or another. It's an NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. We did a poron sidectin. We did our metaphylaxis with Zactran, is what we chose. We did a lidocaine block into the testicular cord and a surgical castration on the 70 bulls. And then we chose to delay vaccination, and we gave our 5-way modified live virus vaccine several weeks later. So here's a little video. We rented a hydraulic chute for the initial processing. And stop me if I'm missing some questions or anything like that. So it worked really well. The cattle were quiet. Had some good help that day. Anyway, so we did a lidocaine block in the testicular cord. I think that sounds like it's going to take a long time. But it really doesn't. Here's a video of that. It doesn't have to anyway. So we would start with that, and then we do the rest of our processing tasks, and then the surgical castration would be right at the very end. So that can be a pretty quick part of the process if you're a veterinarian or if you have the expertise to get that done. Okay, here's a quick video. Another big question in our minds, and one of the main reasons I had butterflies about suggesting this kind of a project to people through any kind of an extension role was whether they're going to stay in. Because a group of calves like these that are from a bunch of different source farms may not have much of a group cohesion at all. And my fear was that if they got out, I didn't know where we'd find them. So the day we turned them out, here's a quick video of that. We had some butterflies, or I did at least. But all went well with the fence. So they respected the hot wire very well. Seemed like most of them must have been around hot wire fences before. So as far as getting them used to a hot wire, our process basically was a little, what we called our dipstick fence, which in the pen that they were in, just a little fence with 2 posts that went out into the middle. And essentially when they stopped knocking that down, we felt like they were getting pretty close to being ready to go out. After that, we opened them up into a 2-acre pasture first. And then after they'd stayed in there for, I think we did a day or so, then we opened the gate, let them go out into the stock field.
How long did it take them to stop knocking over your dipstick fence, as you called it?
Yeah. So 2 or 3 days, if I remember right. It was somewhere in that neighborhood, and then they were leaving it alone. And then we got a little ice storm, and so we were highly motivated to get them out of the small pen. So it hadn't been too long since the last time they knocked it down when we finally opened them up into the 2 acres. But so whether it would have stayed up after that for good or not, I don't know for sure, but things worked out okay after that. So we were thankful. Yeah, for this type of trying to use an extensive grazing system to reduce BRD and to basically prevent those effective contacts where they have chances to spread germs to each other, the fewer days they spend in the pen before they go out into the field, the better. So we wanted that to happen as soon as possible. Okay, so we did go through a BRD break. They got ice on their backs within a day or two after the initial processing, which was not the best timing for a weather event, but that's how it shook down. So our pulls, the calves we noticed that were sick that needed treatment, were treated with either Zactran or norfenicol. We ended up pulling and treating 12 first time treatments, and 3 were retreated for a grand total of 15. We ended up with 3 dead and 1 chronic. You'll see some pictures of him here in a little bit. So 84 of the original 88 calves were sellable. So overall, that left us with death loss of 3.4% and 4.5% removed. The rest recovered, seemed to do well, and after day 28, there were no more calves that needed treatment. So our epidemic curve, each one of those columns is a day. So we observed a 7-day post-treatment interval after the initial Zactran, so we didn't pull anything, and we didn't even see anything that needed to be pulled or looked like it needed to be pulled during that 7 days. And then we ended up pulling 1 calf there, you can see on the 15th of November. And then 2 days where we had 3 calves to treat each day. And then the last one was December 4th. So that's fairly within the bounds of what's expected with a group of calves like this. So no real shocks. It was certainly more than we wanted as far as death loss, but not beyond what we had considered possible. Let's see. Okay, so it's not too hard to find some of the ones that needed treated. These ones had already been treated by this point, and we're kind of working through the case of BRD that they had. So yeah, while the rest were eating, these ones had their heads to the south. They were headed south in more ways than one. So next is a picture of the calf that ended up being a chronic BRD case. And then I took another picture of a very similar pen mate to show the difference there. So there's a calf that is healthy. And there's one that's not only sick, but he's been sick for a little while, and he really struggled. I'll show those to you again. And then that same calf again, you can see as they line up here, I think everybody can probably guess which one of those calves got sick and was treated several times. You can just see the difference in growth that happens when they go through a bout of illness that severe. It's the same calf as in the last picture, but several weeks later. So Okay, and then this is another slightly aggravating situation. This calf was one that we didn't treat that ended up dying untreated, so a pen dead. So they happen. They're frustrating, and you learn from your mistakes. But I showed the picture to my daughter, and she said, "Oh yeah, Dad, that one doesn't look good at all. Look at that neck and his back and the way he stand. Oh, he doesn't. I don't think he feels good." She was exactly right. That picture was one we got just from kind of scanning across and snapping a few pictures, and then we found him dead a couple days later. So anyway, one other thing that was really interesting, when we added the rumensin blocks, it was a pressed mineral block with rumensin in it. Jeremiah, one of the guys that I worked with on this project, said he called and said their demeanor has changed. And I said, "Really? What do you mean?" And he said, "Before it was, oh yeah, let's eat." They'd be at the bunk and ready. And he said, now they come in, they all come in and they stand around, but it's like they're saying, "Okay, I guess it's time to eat." So that was interesting. So one of the things we were thinking about early on was when we were concerned about them staying in the fence, was we wanted the feed to be as palatable as possible. And so that was one of the reasons that we left rumensin out early on, was just to keep them coming in as strong as they could, just in case the fence went down. Hopefully they'd show back up for food. So I think that may have been effective. I don't know. Those are not research findings. Those are just personal observations. So then a few weeks went by and the price of corn and distillers grains went up a lot, and then it snowed and snowed and snowed. And so when the opportunity seemed right, we here in early February, we loaded them up and sold them. And there's a picture of sale day a couple weeks ago, or yeah, a little while back. And so we had to sell them when the forecast was looking really ugly, and that was not what we wanted, but it's kind of how it worked out. In conversations with the owner of the sale barn, he said that some of the things that didn't go our way that day were that some of them were dinged for being staggy, meaning they looked like they had been a late castrate, so they had already developed some of the characteristics of a bull, a little bit more neck, a little broader forehead, those kinds of things that are not desirable from a carcass standpoint. So we got dinged a little bit for that. And then in conversations with him and a feedlot, feedlots in this area are very wary of health risk in these groups of cattle. So those were two things that didn't go our way on sale day that I figured I'd mention just for the good of the group. But overall, our gain was right where we wanted it to be, 2 pounds per day average, even taking into account the fact that 70 of the 84 were castrated on arrival. So they're going to go through a gain slump for a while following that. They averaged 735 pounds at sale, which was right where we were hoping they would be. They weren't fleshy. They looked like they should look. They weren't. They were just kind of middle of the road body condition. I thought for a while about how I could try to put together a cost of gain, but being such a small project, labor seems exaggerated in a small project, and any upfront costs like panels and things like that seem exaggerated with a small project. So what I kind of came to was maybe the thing I can leave you with is that our overall feed cost per day ended up right around $1.09 per calf, which included basically everything we fed: mineral hay and corn stalk bales, in addition to the corn and distillers grain. So that's kind of close to a cost of gain. Well, I mean, minus things like yardage and labor and those those extra costs and death loss, et cetera, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Okay, so here are a few of the extra costs associated with high risk or long distance away calves, among other things. So the trucking cost was about $23 a head, 4 cents a pound, or $4.13 a hundredweight, thereabouts. The death loss that we experienced cost about $34 a head. The metaphylaxis, the antibiotic shot that they got on arrival, was about $15 a head. And then the discounts at sale are kind of hard to gauge because you don't know exactly what to compare to, but somewhere in the neighborhood of about $52 per head. Anyway, that ends up being about 22 cents a pound of extra costs. So you need to find calves that are discounted by more than that to have a chance at benefiting from buying discounted calves, at least based on these numbers and the performance and death loss and so forth that happened for us this year. So, and then feed cost comes into play with that as well. So the results, the way Jeremiah put it, we made the world go round. We were basically needed service from a number of different industries as we had our project from start to finish, feed mills and pharmaceutical companies, sale barns, et cetera. All those businesses are running, so we're helping them. We covered all our cash expenses, so that felt good. Didn't cover labor yardage or ROI, but we had a lot of fun, and it was a fun pilot project. And I was telling one of the other guys, there's a movie called The Ghost in the Darkness from a long time ago, where there's an engineer who's supposed to build a bridge over a river in the middle of Africa, and there's these two lions that are causing trouble up and down the railroad. And actually killing a lot of people. It's a true story. And he makes a trap out of a railroad car, a box car, and he uses people for bait in one end in this heavy duty cage. And the lion's supposed to come in the back door, which is wide open. And as soon as they see the lion, the guys that are in there are supposed to pull a cord, which will drop the door and trap the lion. And the lion comes in, and the guys are too terrified to pull the cord, and the lion starts to rip the cage up, and he's getting close to being able to get near him, and eventually escapes and runs away. So the engineer calls Remington in, a famous hunter, and says, "What do I need to do different? This is going to ruin the entire thing." I mean, there's thousands of people involved, and to get this bridge built. And he looks around and he sees the trap, and he said, "This is fantastic. I used something just like this in India to catch a tiger." And the engineer says, "Yeah, but of course yours worked." And Remington says, no, and as a point of fact, it didn't, but I'm convinced that the theory is sound." So that's what I told Jeremiah. Our project didn't quite work, but I'm still convinced that the theory is sound. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to build on what we learned this year, and we'll see where we go from here. But anyway, so that's where we came to. So a few other little things. The family involvement was an awful lot of fun. We decided it was our recreation for the winter. We found some side benefits. The calves pulled out some old chunks of concrete that we got out of the field. So that's a benefit, a little side benefit. A few things that surprised me about the project. Honestly, I was surprised about the emotional toll of losing 3 of our own calves. You know, as a vet, you see a lot of animals that don't make it. You do postmortems on a lot of them over the years, and that is not nearly as heavy of an emotional toll as having animals that you're responsible for not doing well. That's pretty tough. So that was, even as close to it as I've been over the years, that was still an eye opener for me. Then Levi and Jeremiah, the way they quickly developed cattle handling skills, that was a surprise. That was really fun to see. So I was a little bit surprised by the apprehension regarding health risk on the part of area buyers, even in weaned calves that have been weaned for quite a while. That I wasn't, I mean, I understand it completely, but it was a little greater magnitude than what I understood previously. And then the stag discount. So figuring out when to castrate a group of calves like this is really tough, because you don't want to incur that stag discount because it's significant. But at the same time, if you delay castration, then you're likely to get a better health outcome. That on-arrival castration is one of the things that is research has shown over and over and over is a driver of BRD risk. In fact, it probably comes close to doubling BRD risk compared to other like cattle that are steers on arrival, or more, at least double. So figuring out the timing on that is tough. Ideally, they'd all come to market steers. That'd be great, but they don't, and they're not likely to begin all coming to the market as steers. So what would I do differently? I think I would delay castration. And risk maybe a little more of a stag discount. That's the way I see it right now. I don't know if that's right or wrong. I bet some of you on this call would know a lot more about that actually than I would, as far as the correct timing for that. Maybe we'd start with smaller calves, and then that's not quite as big of an issue. And I would need to spend a lot more time learning, reading, and talking to people about the fine points of marketing, and figuring out exactly the right kind of cattle to try to purchase into a program like this. I think that would certainly have a lot to learn in that regard, as far as trying to make something like this successful.